My name is Leah Creque. I'm professor of English and director of the Howard Thurman Honors Program at Morehouse College. We are delighted to participate in the Elevate Festival for 2020. It just so happens that the Elevate Festival coincides with our honors program reading retreat that we have every year around this time. I don't know if many of you are aware, but the Atlanta University Center borders the West End. And therefore, we are really pleased to introduce our students who are in virtual space and don't have a campus experience just yet, many of them, to the West End in this way. Because the West End demographics change when the students are on campus. All of a sudden, that already culturally rich and environment is magnified with all of these fresh young faces. So you'll get to meet them tonight. We have the reading retreat theme, which is talking about the revolution, voices of liberation and protest across time. It is such a pertinent topic because, as you know, we are in the midst of a double pandemic, the pandemic of racism and the pandemic of COVID-19. And so our students have explored works, the art and legacy of Black protests in America, so that they can contextualize the unrest that they're experiencing now with the struggles and unrest and our resistance and response to this from the past. This year was very special because we had a banner year of African-American literature in which they were recognized, the authors were recognized for their magnificent works with prizes, national and international prizes. We challenged our students to take each one of these authors on, and they fulfilled that goal magnificently, and you'll hear that tonight. The first work that we discovered and explored was Jericho Brown, a newly minted Pulitzer Prize winner, who's also a professor and poet at Emory University. So we read the tradition and we listened to his keynote by way of the Decatur Book Festival. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we've explored two works by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me and The Water Dancer. And as you know, Ta-Nehisi Coates is a multiple award winner. He's a MacArthur Fellow, Pulitzer Prize winner, National Book Award winner, etc. And then next week, the students will discuss The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, who also recently won a Pulitzer Prize, and then he also has an American Book Award. So these students have really dug in deep into this literature. But of course, we shouldn't be surprised because they are Howard Thurman scholars. If you don't know Howard Thurman, he is a Morehouse alum who was the valedictorian of his class and went on to become one of the greatest philosophers and theologians of our time. And so therefore they bear his name and his legacy and tradition. And most of the students that you will meet tonight come to us with exceptional academic backgrounds, meaning that they have high standardized test scores and grade point averages and a strong desire that they've exhibited throughout their lives to learn and to read beyond what is assigned to them. So I am so grateful to have the opportunity to share these students and their ideas and their perspectives with you. I know that they are happy to participate in the community in which their college, Morehouse, exists, the West End. And this is just going to be a beautiful exchange of ideas. So I'm going to invite them now to introduce themselves briefly to you, and then we're going to just dive in and talk about these great works.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Asberry. I'm an alumnus of Morehouse College, and I also serve as the program coordinator for the Howard Thurman Honors Program at Morehouse College. I'll be doing the roll call for our students, and then they will give their Morehouse College introductions so that you know who they are as the rest of this discussion continues. So now we'll have Hasan Henry to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Hasan. I am a political science major on a pre-law track, freshman, and I'm excited to be here. Oh, I'm from San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you. Alex Burt.
Hi, my name is Alex Burt. I'm a freshman econ major from Nashville, Tennessee.
Williams Babalola.
Hi, I'm Williams Babalola. I'm a psychology major from Newark, New Jersey.
William Jenneret,
Hello, my name is William Jenneret. I'm a freshman biology major from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
DeAngelo Fletcher,
Hi, my name is DeAngelo Fletcher. I'm a freshman psychology major from Chicago, Illinois.
Damian Harris,
Hello, my name is Damian Harris. I am an intended CTEMS major from Atlanta, Georgia.
Drake Jones,
Hello, my name is Drake Jones. I'm a biology and Spanish major from Detroit, Michigan.
Joey Etheridge,
Good evening. My name is Joey Etheridge. I am an English major from Madison, Mississippi.
Cairo Jackson,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cairo Jackson. I'm a freshman computer science major from Brooklyn, New York, but I currently reside in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Kamahl Grant,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kamahl Grant. I am a freshman mathematics major with a minor in economics from Lawrenceville, Georgia.
Joseph Bartholomew,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph Bartholomew. I'm a freshman accounting major from St. Louis, Missouri.
Kai Bird,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kai Bird. I'm a computer science major from Charlotte, North Carolina.
George Lester,
Hello, everybody. My name is George Lester. I'm a freshman finance major from Austell, Georgia, and I'm excited to be here.
Neil Hamilton,
Good evening. My name is Neil Hamilton. I'm a freshman chemistry major from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Kerry D. Singleton,
Greetings, everyone. My name is Kerry Singleton. I'm a freshman political science and government major, pre-law track from Greeleyville, South Carolina, but I currently reside in Savannah, Georgia.
Iksan Elamin,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Iksan Elamin. I'm a freshman dual degree engineering major with a focus in applied physics and aerospace engineering, and I'm from Decatur, Georgia.
O'Dane White,
Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Creque, and I'm a freshman psychology major from Teaneck, New Jersey. I'm glad to speak with you all today.
This concludes our roll call of some of the students from our cohort of Howard Thurman Honors Program Scholars.
All right, thank you. All right, gentlemen, let's begin. I hope you can see this text, Jericho Brown, the tradition. That is how we began our semester. So I don't know what the students might say, but I tell you, we certainly enjoyed the keynote address, and we've discussed this several times. And so I'd like briefly for them to give you their reactions and comments before we move into the works by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So gentlemen, what did you think of Jericho Brown, the tradition?
Hasan Henry, would you like to share some of your thoughts on the text?
Sure. So I feel like in the context of our theme, like the theme of revolution, I thought it was really important to sort of emphasize the perspective that Jericho Brown was coming from as a Black queer person. I think a lot of times Black queer people are erased from the greater context of like Black liberation and protest, when in fact, you know, it's important to recognize the contributions of, for example, James Baldwin or Bayard Rustin or Angela Davis, people who have really given their lives for the name of Black revolution and Black liberation, and their perspectives as queer people and their identities as queer people have not necessarily been centered or considered as much as it should have. So I thought that Jericho Brown really brought a fresh perspective when he really explained and emphasized those experiences, because it's not something that we get to see in this context a lot.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment?
I can comment. So the way I took in this reading was a little different. I was actually in a room with my mom, and I got the audiobook. So I was listening to the whole book of poems, and it was interesting how they seamlessly connected from one to the next. Sometimes I wouldn't know until like 10 minutes later that the poem had ended. But I remember one of the poems that spoke to me the most, which I think is very applicable in our current state, is Bullet Holes. And I just thought the imagery in that poem was incredibly disturbing, but beautiful at the same time. One of my favorite parts was at the end where he said, so after talking about how if he were to kill himself, it would not be in a police car. He talked about how oftentimes cities try to pay off our sorrows and injustices. So in the last few lines, he said, a city can pay a mother to stop crying. The more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain. So just the description of a bullet being fished from the folds of the brain is something I'd never heard before. And just the imagery, I think it really conveys the horrible things that go on in the Black community.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to speak on Jericho Brown? Well, one thing I noticed,
my apologies.
go ahead.
I was finding the poem that I wanted to speak on, but
Please go ahead. Mm-hmm.
one thing that you definitely see with the colloquialisms that he uses and addressing Black culture and nuances in a way, he does it in a way that's very straightforward, but like O'Dane mentioned earlier, it's in a way that's oftentimes disturbing and oftentimes throws you off, and he likes to insert those things that will throw you off at the beginning of poems rather than in the middle or at the end. He obviously doesn't have an offsetting style, but he is not trying to be. I think that's one of the beautiful things about it. But one of my favorite poems in the book was After Avery R. Young. And what I mean by the beginning of the poems is that you can already tell what you are getting yourself into, or is going to throw off your expectations of what you thought it was immediately at the start. It starts off with, "Black is not a country, but I live here, where even the youngest call you baby. Sometimes you ain't we, sometimes you is everybody. Washboards rain comes, we open our mouths for a drink, rather be radical than a fool. Oh, and no, we are not interested in killing white people or making them." And what he speaks to us in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable in the sense that I can relate to it. Some of the poems are dark, like with O'Dane mentioned. I wish I didn't have to be able to relate to that. I wish I didn't have to possibly know someone who may have gone through that. I wish I didn't have to I wish I could look at the poems as from a subdued perspective, but I can't, because these are things that happen to Black people like me. And that's what's so powerful about it, in my opinion.
You gentlemen have given us such great perspectives, both on the poetry and then on your personal insight. One of the interesting things about Jericho Brown was that he was very innovative. I think the reason he won the Pulitzer Prize is because he invented a whole new genre of poetry. He combined some very traditional forms of poetry, the sonnet, etc., and combined them. And so I think that new format that he gave empowered the very stark message that he wanted to put forth. Are there any other comments on Jericho Brown? Or do you want to move on now to Ta-Nehisi Coates?
I think we should move on to Ta-Nehisi Coates, especially because you mentioned how with the tradition and the works of Jericho Brown that he's really introducing and creating his own new language and this new approach. And that's something that we really saw happening in the works of Between the World and Me, as well as The Water Dancers. So it seems like a great segue into those works.
Okay, I agree with you there. So gentlemen, let's start with that. What did you find that was innovative, or how did Coates give us new vocabulary or new way to discuss something that's very old and we can't seem to get rid of? But the discrimination, the oppression, the hurt, the pain is old. Like Ntozake Shange used to say, we're still fighting the same old white men. But he's found a new way to tell us about it, to discuss it.
I found it inspiring. This book is absolutely fantastic. It's been probably the only book that I've ever actually recommended that somebody else read. I actually went to my mother and I said, you need to read this. It's because the way that Coates writes the book, it's not like it's not like a story being told. It's his own personal feelings and vendetta against what he's been growing up with.
Okay, now which book are you talking about now? Because we're discussing two of Coates' work. Okay, very good.
Between the World and Me. It's written directly to his son, which feels like it's written directly to me, because I can think about my mother saying this to me, or I can think about another mentor of somebody saying this to me about their personal vendetta, or the way that they've been raised, or just the way that the world has treated them, and them preparing the next generation for what they have experienced. I find it most striking in this book. It has a lot of powerful statements about race and the fact that we believe that race is just an actual fact of life. And I think my favorite quote within this book is that race is the father of racism. It's not the other. It's not the other way around. And it's the fact that these roles have been created rather than through genealogy or physiognomy. It's been created out of hierarchy. So I think the way that he describes race in this book is absolutely powerful, and it's absolutely a new way that I've been looking at it since then. The new vocabulary that he gives us is absolutely, it's simple, but it's eye-opening, because it's directed towards a crowd that everybody can understand it. Specifically, he would call white people. He doesn't refer to them as white people in this book. He refers to them as dreamers, saying that their lifestyle has been built off the American dream, and that they have been built off this dream of what this nation is supposed to be. However, the nation is built actually off of irony and hypocrisy. And he refers mostly to the African Americans and Black people as the black body, as he relates most of his points back to dreamers building this nation off of destroying and building it off of the black body, almost saying is that Black people have been a foundation of this nation. However, we've always been stepped on. So I think the way that Coates handles this book and the way he handles his content in this book is absolutely phenomenal, and it's a powerful read.
Well, I appreciate your perspective, both the personal and your unpacking the way in which he addresses these issues. Are there any other students who want to speak to that?
Yeah,
I would like to. You got that, Cairo.
Thank you. Yeah, this is how excited we are about this book. We all love this book. It's an amazing book. Personally, for me, this is a book that's always brought tears to my eyes whenever I've read it. You know, being a Black man in America, you know what I'm saying? With us all being Black people in America, we are no stranger to, you know, we're no stranger to the obvious, pitfalls and obvious oppression that does come to our people, you know? And for me, as I'm, you know, now entering college, as I'm in college now, having, read this book, it's definitely, just speaking on to what DeAngelo said, it's extremely eye-opening. You know, for me personally, just, I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words right now. I'm a little nervous, I apologize. But like,
okay.
Yeah. It's very hard to put into words how this book makes me feel. Like, to understand, it does well to simplify just where we are as a people and just how much further we have to go as well. You know what I'm saying? Like, to put it simply, the American dream does not exist without the Black body. You know what I'm saying? That's just like the main point that Ta-Nehisi Coates just drives throughout this book over and over again. America would not be where it is today without Black people. You know what I'm saying? And I do feel like that's something that we have to continue to remember. That's something that it's something that we have to continue to go back to. You know what I'm saying? Because as we go throughout history, as we look at instances in which Black people have been oppressed, in which, you know, we haven't gotten our fair shake even today. You know what I'm saying? With the news of Breonna Taylor's, with the indictment of only one of the police officers, it's not even for murder. You know what I'm saying? It's for wanton endangerment. We have to understand the fact that like life is hard right now, but like we can't give up. You know what I'm saying? There's still more to this fight. There's still more that we have to do. If we built this country, you know what I'm saying? If it's resting on our backs right now, you know what I'm saying? So what's stopping us from rising above it? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm sorry, Dr. Creque.
No, go ahead. I was just saying thank you. There's a long list of you that want to speak, so just chime on in.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to bring out how relatable this book was for me, especially with recent events that have been going on in America. And basically in part one, where the author, I'm sorry, not Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm sorry, I'm nervous too. But he ended up basically, all right, so the book is to his son, but he basically went back into the background of his life and growing up in West Baltimore, I believe. And he basically brought up the major divide between Black and white America. But likewise to myself, he couldn't understand how the divide was created or what continued the divide. Well, you know, I kind of know how the divide was created, but how the divide continues. And he ended up breaking open a book from his father, I believe it was Africana or something like that. And it ended up basically making him feel kind of like how I feel, especially with what happened on today with the Breonna Taylor case. And it kind of enraged him so much in a sense, wherein his rage kind of reflected the ideals of nonviolent protesting, like how Malcolm X kind of felt. And, you know, that's one of my figures that I look up to in the political world. But it is really profound, and it honestly is very relatable, especially with events going on today. And after Cairo, you know, brought up today, that kind of made me more emotional, because it's been a day for me, you know, with thinking about everything that's been going on. But the book did a really good job of talking about issues that are occurring on today. And I'm really thankful that this book was assigned to me during during this time period that we're experiencing, just to kind of watch how he went through these things and how he's, writing it to his son. And as one of my classmates said earlier, I feel like I am that son he wrote this book to. I feel like it was a great bridge for young African American males like us, and I'm very grateful for the experience.
All right. Well,
Can I speak on something real quick?
Sure.
Now, one thing that, I really loved when reading both of these books is his use of symbolism throughout. Because, he uses many different symbols with both the books. But, but just to expand on one thing that stood out to me the most is with the water dancer is actually water itself. Now, when thinking of African Americans, our history, water has played an important part. Because you think of the Middle Passage, which was a big waterway that had us transported here, and other things too, such as old African-American hymns such as Wade in the Water. And so I really like his use of symbolism throughout, especially with the water, because these ideas, not only are seen in the book, but can be seen throughout histories with African Americans. So that's one thing that I really, took note of. And I thought it was I like the way that he delivered it. I like the way that he delivered his symbols throughout each of the novels.
Thank you. All right, Kamahl.
I would like to piggyback on something all the way to what DeAngelo said, because those were two very important concepts that stood out to me. The concept of the black body and the concept of the dreamers. And he pushes this to an extreme using symbolism, as Joey said, and irony, as I believe someone earlier also said. And it's interesting because he pushes the concept of the black body to the point where he almost personifies it to where it takes on a character of its own.
Yeah.
He separates it from the souls and the sentience of the people who inhabit black bodies, that being black people. And one thing that I got from his constant repeating of doing that is you get the theme that which we already know, but he enforces it without really saying it. America doesn't care about black people, but America is obsessed with the black body. America is obsessed with controlling it. America is obsessed with keeping it in line. America is obsessed with exploiting it. And if it doesn't stay in these parameters, it can easily be destroyed without consequence. Yeah. And I think somewhere in the book he made the point that the black body is very fragile, not for the fact that it is physically weak, but for the fact that it can be destroyed and there will be no consequence. There will be no punishment so that people in the future do not feel emboldened to do the same thing that others did in terms of hateful acts. There is no reprimandation for destroying the black body, no matter what you look like. They don't care if it's police. They're not going to charge you. They don't care if it's black, if it's another black person. Fine, destroy that black body, and we'll put the other one in jail. So I'm a little bit more emotional today because with the thing with Breonna Taylor, it's frustrating because as soon as they said they were going to block off downtown, I wanted to have hope. But when they said they were going to block off downtown, I said to myself, they're going to do some BS, and because they don't want rioting. And I immediately sensed that they're going to do some BS, and that happened. But and it's insulting in a sense, and it reminds me of a point in the book where earlier in the book when he was talking about the interview that he had with that lady on her show, and he said, but at the end of the segment, the host flashed a widely shared picture of an 11-year-old black boy tearfully hugging a white police officer. Then she asked me about hope. That is insulting because they don't need hope. We are the ones who need hope. Mm-hmm. And it's sad because he says what we expected. And you see that throughout the book that he takes a very jaded tone, but it's hard not to. They always tell us to fight and persevere, but it's hard not to be jaded. It's hard not to be cynical. He says, I knew then that I had failed. And I remember that I had expected to fail. And that's a very hard thing to cope with. And my favorite quote to sum up the relationship between the black body and the American dream, as DeAngelo was talking about, my favorite quote in the entire book is page 10 and 11. And he says, when the journalist asked me about my body, it was like she was asking me to awaken her from the most gorgeous dream. And it represents the dream represents two different distinct things to white people and to black people. And the dream is something that is taunted in our face and hung in our face as something that we can attain. And even for the few who do attain it, they weren't meant to. And it's insulting in a way. It's not only frustrating, it is insulting because we see the injustices in our face. We are not blind to this. And that was what I took away from the book.
Okay. I kind of want to piggyback off what he said because I think that Coates's works are a really great example of this idea of intertextuality, this idea that texts are connected in a way. And so you look at Between the World and Me, he talks about the fact that his father had gotten angry at him because he hadn't stood up for himself and his bike was stolen. And then in the next sentence, he talked about how he was reprimanded for being too violent with his teacher. This idea that you're either not violent enough or you're too violent, and there's no in between. There's no guidance. There's no guidelines for how one should function. A Black person should function in this society. And then we can look at the idea of the American dream, the fact that America was supposedly founded on the ideas of equality and freedom of opportunity, but those opportunities were never available for Black people. That's a contradiction. And then you can look at the water dancer, in which on one hand, water represented this idea of freedom for the water dancers. You know, that was their way of expressing the limited bodily autonomy that they had access to. But at the same time, the water was also, it was death in a sense, you know, because the main character, Hiram, he drove the carriage of his white master into a body of water, and the white master ended up dying. He nearly died. And so in two senses, the water is equally death and equally freedom. And so I think what he's trying to portray is that the Black experience is inherently based on these contradictions, in which there's no true answer, there's no true way to navigate through a world of white supremacy, because it is contradictory. And I think that sense of contradiction is a source of Black rage. And so I guess I'll end it with a James Baldwin quote: to be Black and relatively conscious in the US is to be in a constant state of rage, because these contradictions are infuriating. There's nothing around them. They just exist.
I'm glad that you made that segue, because we do need to now balance our discussion into speaking more about the water dancer. And maybe our last few comments about Between the World and Me might discuss the bridge that Coates builds between his nonfiction work, which is a letter, Between the World and Me, a letter from him to his son, and then to this very creative fictional work, which borderlines on being a historical fiction, speculative fiction, magic realism.
I have a question for Hasan real quick. So you saw the water as a symbolism of either of death or freedom. But for me, I saw it in a similar way, but slightly different. I saw it as primarily freedom, in the sense that maybe for them, in some situations where it was really bad, maybe that death was freedom.
And I absolutely agree with that. And I think the primary example is that the story that Sophia told about the African chief, in which, you know, they had a rebellion on the slave ship and took over the ship, and they were surrounded by all these other ships, and so they knew they were going to go down, and so the African chief told them to walk into the water. In that sense, I mean, the water was, in a literal sense, it was death. They were walking into their deaths, but it was also freedom from this idea of living death, this idea of slavery being worse than death. So I definitely agree with you. It has a dual symbolism, definitely.
Let me connect these two books in a way, because we do need to talk a little bit more about The Water Dancer. It's also a fantastic book. I would like to bring to the point that in a lot of works, if you read two works by the same author, you don't really see the connection there. But in the way that this Between the World and Me is a nonfiction book, it's kind of a look into his mind. It's really interesting to then transfer over to The Water Dancer, where sometimes I was reading the book and I'm like, man, this seems like a self-insert. It seemed like Coates is kind of the main character here. It seems like Coates is Hiram. I specifically say that is because a lot of the views and a lot of the themes that appear in Between the World and Me come up as character points for Hiram and The Water Dancer. I'll say specifically Between the World and Me, he specifically tells his son to never forget, to always remember his past and remember his ancestors. And in The Water Dancer, Hiram is blessed with this amazing memory to remember everything that people tell him, and that he has this mysterious quality of people always telling his stories to him. So it's kind of a way of Coates saying to always remember the stories that are told to you so you don't lose those. Another way that The Water Dancer and the Between the World and Me are connected. I had one in mind, it just slipped. That's a shame. It was a really good example too.
We'll still be here. Take your time.
I think it's the someone take over for me. I promise I'll chime back in if the thought comes back to me.
Well, you did well because you connected well the fact that he told his son, despite all of the hardships and the struggle that he must continue to endure as a Black man in America, his job is to remember. And so you connected that point very well to what Hiram's gift of memory did for him, and it led him into modes of resistance and freedom. Okay, so did it come back to you?
I remember. Yeah. I remember.
Okay.
I was gonna say there's another connection between the book is that Coates was raised in a somewhat, I want to say abusive, but he brings up in the book that Black parents loved their children to the point where it's obsessive in a way, and he was raised in a house of really tough love, and that he never really got that sweet and tenderness. And you see Hiram grow up, his mother's not there, but then he takes on this other motherly figure, Dina. And you also see that she's also about that tough love, and that she never really shows that that she really cares for Hiram. But it's told in a conversation between Hiram and Sophia that she really does love him, and that she just can't show it because she just wants to be tough for him. And a lot of what Hiram takes away while he's he has to then serve for Maynard, and then while he's then transferring to the underground, a lot of his motivations and a lot of the ways that a lot of the ways that he views things is also through Thina, or through the last things that he told Thina, or the ways that she raised him, or the ways that just his experience around her. So it's a link between that too as well, and I found it amazing to see the inner working of the author also be translated to this fictional book.
Very well done.
If I could connect one more piece of connection between The World and Me and The Water Dancer. Near the end of Between the World and Me, there's a quote from Coates where he says, when speaking to his son, you must extend the same respect into the past, in reference to respecting every human being as a singular. He says, slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. It is a particular, specific enslaved woman whose mind is as active as your own, whose range of feelings is as vast as your own, who prefers the way the light falls in one particular spot in the woods, who enjoys fishing when the water eddies in the nearby stream, who loves her mother in her own complicated way, thinks her sister talks too loud, has a favorite cousin, a favorite season, who excels at dressmaking, and knows inside herself that she is as intelligent and capable as anyone. Slavery is the same woman born in a world that loudly proclaims its love of freedom and describes this world in essential text, a world in which these same professors hold this woman a slave, hold her mother a slave, her father a slave, her daughter a slave. So I feel like that excerpt really encapsulates The Water Dancer as a whole. I think you can look at that excerpt as sort of an introduction to the book itself. It could serve as a foreword in the first pages of The Water Dancer, because in that excerpt he pretty much summarizes The Water Dancer when he says that slavery isn't like an anonymous faceless period in American history. Slavery is every enslaved child, mother, father, man, woman, boy, girl. It's every enslaved child of Africa that was put to work, ripped from their homeland, transported on ships where many of them died, put to work in a strange land, stripped of their identity, their humanity, when they were actually humans, as human as you and me are talking about them, as human as Ta-Nehisi Coates and his son, which is why he's trying to get him to realize that slaves, this hypothetical slave girl that he's describing had the same wants and dreams as any other woman. And I feel like you could compare that to character in The Water Dancer, Sophia, because she had dreams. She had dreams of freedom. She wanted to escape from Nathaniel, who subjugated her and raped her, and she wanted to escape from that life. She had talent. She could water dance, and she had dreams, but she was still treated as property, as though she was less than human. And I feel like Coates provides that sort of prequel into her story before we even know her as a character. Before we even open The Water Dancer, we have an idea of her story and the millions of Black women that were enslaved in that time period, like her, that had the same wants, interests, dislikes, and opinions as she did.
That was very well stated, and I appreciate your giving us that nice quote. And it would make a nice forward. It does kind of prefigure the work that he does in The Water Dancer. Very well done.
Yeah, I would like to bring up another important issue that is still going on today, and that issue is assumptions and stereotypes that comes with our brown skin and being Black. In Between the World and Me, we see Coach's friend Prince Jones. He was the charismatic man. He was Mr. Popular. Everybody loved him. He was tall, graceful. You know, all these things going from a Christian man. But at the end of the day, he was still murdered and he was still shot because he's Black. And then going back to the water dancer, Hiram. Hiram is probably one of the smartest men in that entire book. And yet he still wasn't able to shine as brightly as he could because he's Black in the society that he lived in. And if he were to prove his brilliance, people would take offense to that and end up lynching him and killing him. And then today, I can relate that to the question of privilege. A lot of our Black leaders and celebrities speak out about privilege today, and they get feedback so much about how can you talk, you're privileged, you live in a big mansion and all this different types of stuff. But really, it doesn't matter whether you're a professional athlete, whether you have 5 degrees, whether you made it out, whether you did this and that. At the end of the day, when you walk out and when you're driving down the street, you're Black. And that is just, it makes me so mad, frustrated, and all that, emotional whenever I start talking about it. But yeah, we can see that throughout from slavery and still in our society today.
True. Well, I'm glad you found a way to discuss it. And I'm glad the coach helped you to find a way to discuss it.
I would like to speak on a specific part of The Water Dancer. Personally, one of my favorite parts is the introduction of our famous historical figure, Moses, aka Harriet Tubman. Man, it's such a great part that she's part of this book, and the content and actual context of this book, that she's part of it. That Hiram has this power of conduction in the way that he can sort of tap into a past of his and live in that moment for a second. And I think I wanted to know what you guys felt about the way that Coates uses Harriet Tubman in this book, and why specifically do you think that Hiram looks up to her and sees her as a figure?
Your question was why Hiram looks up to Harriet Tubman?
Yeah, that, and specifically, what is the importance of Coates using her in this book as a figure? If of all the figures, of all the historical figures to be using, what is the importance of Coates bringing her into this book, into this context?
I feel like she is the bit of historical truth that makes the story feel a little bit more realistic, as it is like realistic fiction. And up until that point, it was mostly fiction with, you know, fictional characters, fictional places, and like magical, mystical powers. But with the introduction of Harriet Tubman, we get a little bit of a more grounded narrative with reference to her efforts to free slaves on the Underground Railroad, which Hiram is now a part of. So he looks up to her because she's doing the work that he wishes he could. Not that he wishes, but she's doing the work. She's done like great things, like led so many slaves to freedom, and which is like, she's like, he looks to her as like a mentor because they both share the same power, the same ability of conduction, which like he idolizes her on like 2 different fronts of like a great figure for the abolitionist movement, the resistance, the rebellion, and as well as a connection to conduction. And since conduction since the power of conduction relies on your memory, that connect that they have for conduction is also a connection to the past, you know. So I feel like that's why he might look up to Harriet.
And I just have a quick question. Like, before in the book, whenever the concept of conduction came up, I would always think of this like strange, abstract ability that made it seem more like fiction. But then when Harriet Tubman is introduced in the story, I don't know about you all, but for me, it made me start thinking of how they used to make legends about how she had like a 6th sense. So it made me like it made me think of something that was kind of like a folk legend, and it made the concept of conduction more real to me in the story. But that was just my thoughts.
I think Ta-Nehisi Coates uses Harriet Tubman because he does an excellent job in both of his pieces of showing the ethos of the era. So like he visited Monticello, and so even in Between the World and Me, when he used the epistolary format in a letter to my son, he's capturing the ethos of this era that we're in, the Black Lives Matter movement. He's capturing that anxiety, that need for change. And he does that in A Water Dancer, when I think he uses Harriet Tubman with that in that story to show the collective spirit that slaves had back then. And through that, he encapsulates like the ethos of that era.
I think the inclusion of Harriet Tubman also says something about the way that we as Black people view our historical figures. I feel like we tend to view, people like Harriet Tubman and MLK and Malcolm X, et cetera, as these paragons, they're sort of like these idealized versions of regular human beings who they put their work and their effort towards a good cause. And so I think a lot of the inclusion of Harriet Tubman was to humanize her in the way that Coates also humanized the other enslaved people. Because I think a central theme of this book was simply acknowledging that slaves were human, that they had human emotions, that they were people, and that too often their humanity is overlooked.
And I feel like even today, they're still dehumanizing slaves because for what I've been taught in history classes, when I think of slaves, I just think of the people that lived 200 years ago that worked and that were oppressed and all of that. But what I don't think about is, like Hasan said, is that these people had dreams. Like I said in the book, people had favorite seasons. They had favorite foods and all this stuff, and they thought just like I did. But yeah.
And I think that idea of dehumanization kind of stems from this, slavery was, as we've learned, primarily about like bondage, and it was sort of a business back then. But something like a key point of slavery that is often overlooked is the idea of basically cutting off Africans from the culture, which is why I think this idea of memory in The Water Dancer is so important. And I feel like there also is something to say about the fact that the main character had to have a literal superpower to like overcome the difficulties. But I think in effect, by cutting off slaves from, like their culture, like their African ancestry and their culture, you basically erase their identity. And when you can do that, you're able to control them better. And that kind of speaks to the idea of like keeping slaves like under wraps per se. And that kind of ties into like what's happening today, because when another Black person falls victim to police brutality, we push the idea of posting about it on Instagram or social media so that we don't forget about what happens.
And that's an important factor too, because we have to, like, in one of my in my FYE class I take history of the African diaspora up to 1900, and one of the things I noticed in the book is that they use the term slavery a lot. They use the term slaves rarely. The book refers to people more so as captives, or more so as people who were enslaved. So I think that's a very important detail, because about disconnecting people from their culture, Iksan, because when you start to get to generations that don't remember Africa or don't have stories of Africa from older generations, then their identity is the slave first. And that is the point to where slavery can be exploited further, because that becomes the identity instead of something that has been brought upon us. I was born into this, therefore I am this. And that should never be the mindset. But unfortunately, and by no fault of their own, that was for a lot of slaves.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our session, and I would love for students to share maybe a collective statement about all three works. What did you get out of this experience thus far? I know we've got one more book, and next semester we'll be doing Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, or we might get to it before the semester is over. But anyway, and we're doing Michael Dyson next semester also. And we're going to re-examine Martin Luther King's Where Do We Go From Here, because that's very pertinent to where we are next semester. But I would love to hear your insights as to the collective experience of this reading program thus far, and the topic of revolution and contextualizing the protests of today with the protests of the past.
I would just like to briefly comment and just say how appreciative that I am of the experience, to kind of have it come from the perspective of other individuals and provide guidance and provide encouragement for me, because these stories all put a focus on some of the events that have happened in the past, and it provides us a way of how we progress. It shows evidence of how we are making progress. And the freedoms that we enjoy today were not freedoms that our ancestors were able to enjoy. So it provides another form of thankfulness for me. I'm very appreciative of this book experience.
For me, the one message that I get from all three books when you just tie it all together is that as an African American, it's just going to be more difficult for you. Rather it be that you're trying to do something good and it's not good enough, or you do one thing bad and then you're saying that's terrible. As an African American, you're going to have that extra judgment attached to you. But in terms of the revolution going forward, I think what these books are trying to tell the reader is that it's time to change the narrative of Africans. Like, it's time for us not to be associated with crime or anything bad like that, but to be strong men. Like, we are strong men. We are African. We are Morehouse men. Like, we are very, very good people. So I think that the central idea of this book, all three of these books are trying to display, is that we must move forward and change the bad narrative we have and just, grow as people. So that's why I think the whole three books tie in together as.
A message that I took away from all three of these books is that it is our job as Black men, not even as Black men, that's just including people in Morehouse, but as Black people, to not take what they give you at face value. That's what I took from it, is that you need to question everything and look deeper into things that may seem fishy or things that might have a slighted meaning, the way that people word things to you, or the way that systems are set up, the way that you had to go the extra mile to expect things. It's the same way that Joy said you have to go to the extra mile, you have to work harder for it. Another thing I took from it is that you have to empower yourself, and you have to empower the movement by educating yourself and thinking about their stories and remembering the atrocities that happen and thinking, how can I make it better? People always say you have to look past it, you have to look past it, you have to look towards the future, you have to look what we can do for the future. I think what I take from these books is that you can't look past it, you have to look through it. You have to look directly at it, but you also have to see that through this experience, we have to be able to make a change, and we have to be able to learn from what has happened here and make it better for the future generations. And this experience in the book festival so far is probably the most fun I've had reading of all. Like, I've read a lot in school, but this is probably the most fun recreational reading that I've ever done. So I'm extremely appreciative of this program, and I'm extremely appreciative of the opportunities and the books that are given to me.
I'll keep it short and sweet. I think Angela Davis really said it best. We know the road to freedom has always been stalked by death, and I think that's what these books have taught me.
Beautiful. I think for me, I got from these books that the struggle is our power, and we're gonna find strength within each other. Here at Morehouse, we're gonna, through these books, I learned that we're gonna cultivate our strength to fight the system and fight this racism from one another. And these books helped me to come to that realization.
I feel like for me, one major lesson I got from all three of these books is just the fact that Black people as a collective, we are greater than we're greater than I guess like the hand that we've been dealt. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, just times that we're living in, it's rough for Black people. You know what I'm saying? It's rough for many people of color. Excuse me. And so for that reason, I just want to say that, looking back through all these books, you know what I'm saying? You see examples of Black empowerment. You know what I'm saying? You see Black people saying, no, like I don't want this to be the type of life that I want to lead anymore. You know what I'm saying? So for that reason, the main lesson I took away is just the fact that we're better. We're better than the way that we're perceived in the media. You know what I'm saying? Just speaking back to what I believe it was Joey or Alex said. I can't remember though, but yeah.
Both of these authors, you can tell through their works, both of these authors are strongly disillusioned with the current state that America is in. And one big thing that I pick up from both these books, from all three of these books, if I were to put it in a word, is dissatisfaction. I think a lot of people in America like to think that we have gotten to a point where some people seem to assume that since we are past the civil rights era, is that we are in a place where issues aren't as big as they seem, or where people exaggerate things. But we have reasons every day not to be satisfied. And you can see it in Jericho Brown's off-putting and aggressive writing, and you can see it in Ta-Nehisi Coates' ironic and jaded stories and personal anecdotes. There's a strong feeling of dissatisfaction.
I'd also like to just kind of carry off on that. I think the whole dissatisfaction that we're facing is in opposition to the dream that the dreamers have. And they're trying to push that on us. So what my message is, or what I've received from these three books, is that you have to know your history and to humanize yourself. Because if we were to look into the dream that they've been pushing on us, we wouldn't see ourselves as an individual, or our ancestors as individuals who had a favorite season. We just see them as faceless group of enslaved people who were oppressed and have that as our history. So I think through reading the 3 novels and poems, the message that I've got is that we have to know who we are beyond the narrative that's been pushed onto us, and to move forward from there. Because in order to revolt, you have to have a reason. You have to know why. And I think these books and these novels, they give us many reasons why.
Definitely, it's definitely like a wake up call reading all 3 of those books. It's like your own personal, like, I don't want to like keep repeating it, but it definitely is a wake up call. It forces you to look back on your past. Like the past is a definite, it's definitely a theme that connects all 3 of the books. We have to understand our struggle, what we've been through what we've been through as a dehumanized people in order for us to humanize ourselves. We have to know our struggle in order to be free from it. And we can't ask white people like to understand their racism. We can't like wait for them and be patient and educate them on all the ins and outs of white supremacy, because like even the most not racist white person still benefits from white supremacy. So it's not, you can't wait for the oppressor to hand you the tools of your own freedom. It is up to the oppressed to free themselves and to find dignity and humanity in their own past of not having those things, of not being human, not being seen as human.
And to sort of speak on that, I think the biggest lesson I learned from the 3 books was this idea that as Black people, we should not only not be ashamed of our Blackness, but we should embrace it. And only by embracing that, we are able to like defeat the oppressors, basically. And, you know, I think the only way that we lose as Black people is if we start to believe and fall victim to like what they say we are. So we need to maintain the mentality that as Black people, we are not what white people think we are. We're not like how they describe us or how the stereotypes of us describe us. But, you know, we are Black people and we have history. And I feel like no matter like how many Black people are killed by police, like as long as we, you know, stay mentally strong, like we can't ever lose, to be honest.
Something that I wanted to add really quickly. So something that I really got from the 3 of these books is that the Black experience sort of inherently has its tragedies, but and even today and even in the past, that it's not really reassuring that it's gonna be okay today or in the near future, and we shouldn't try to assure ourselves and try to give ourselves false hope that it will be, but instead we should try to better understand our circumstances, and maybe that could be our weapon and our power that can propel us toward a better life for ourselves in the future.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Iksan kind of said, a message I think I got from all 3 of these books is that we as Black people have this immense power that we have to learn how to withhold and to cherish, especially within all that is prevalent in today's society. And it's important that we gain the knowledge, such as from all 3 of these books, that we gain the knowledge from both the past and how they relate to the world today, to use it so that we're able to withhold it and bring it to the light, not just for our generation, but the generations after us.
After what Iksan said about, I believe, or it might have been George, but saying that we can't wait for our tools to be handed to us by oppressors. Stokely Carmichael said it best. You cannot give somebody freedom, you can only enslave them. We already know that we have freedom. It is our freedom. No one can take away that right. So we must go get it. And so I believe that's how we should continue on in our lives.
Well, I tell you, I am so proud of these gentlemen. They are a group of committed scholars. They let us know that the world will be in good hands. I think to hear their perspectives tonight is a gift to the world. And it has been an honor to work with them this semester. And I look forward to the time when we are back all together and they get to experience the West End firsthand, and to see what a rich, vibrant cultural and intellectual community it is that supports them. And I think to sum it up, we have been elevated tonight. Our discussion has been one which has elevated our culture, our literature, our work that's yet to be done. And I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of Elevate.